I walked into that birthday party thinking it would be nothing more than a typical evening of cake, champagne, and family chatter. I had told myself to keep my guard up, but I never expected the night to unravel the way it did. The moment I stepped through the glass doors into my parents' high-rise home, I felt that familiar knot in my chest, the kind that came whenever I was forced back into the role of the overlooked daughter. The marble floors gleamed beneath my heels, chandeliers threw glints of light across the polished tables, and everywhere I looked, people laughed like they were part of a glossy magazine spread. My sister's 35th birthday was clearly staged to perfection. She stood in the center of the room in a gown that shimmered like liquid silver, her fiancé at her side, their smiles wide and untouchable. Guests circled them as though the night had been crafted solely for their entertainment. I had contributed more than enough to this event. I had purchased cases of vintage wine, paid for part of the private chef, and even covered some of the decor that now had people snapping photos as if they were in a palace. Still, not a word of thanks. My mother breezed past me without so much as a glance, fussing over the arrangement of cupcakes on the dessert table. My father shook hands with colleagues, his voice booming with pride as he introduced my sister to anyone who didn't already know her. It was as though my presence had been reduced to little more than a shadow drifting around the edges. I forced a smile, reminding myself that I was not just anyone here. I was the one who had built a life on my own terms, the one who had worked late nights and endured endless battles to carve out a career in technology. At 32, I was a chief officer in a thriving company, living in a penthouse I had earned without anyone's handouts. Yet none of that seemed to matter. My achievements were invisible in this place. My family had made a habit of acting as though success without their stamp of approval did not exist. I slipped to the bar and poured myself a glass of wine I had purchased with my own money. The glass was cool in my hand, but the sting in my chest was warm and sharp. A woman I barely knew leaned toward me, her voice syrupy with false sweetness. She said how proud I must be of my sister, and how bright her future looked. I managed to return a polite smile, though every word landed like a pinprick. Proud of what? Proud that she had lived years without lifting a finger to contribute. Proud that she had relied on my parents' generosity while I carried my own burdens? The injustice of it pressed heavier with every passing minute. I wanted to belong. More than anything, I wanted to walk into that room and feel the kind of embrace that said I was valued, that I mattered. Instead, I found myself cornered by whispers, by comparisons to the golden child who could do no wrong. My aunt's sharp voice cut through the music, reminding me again how ambition meant little if I had no husband, no children. My uncle laughed as though my career were some kind of joke. Even my cousin smirked, his words slicing as he asked what good was success if you ended up alone. The walls felt closer with each jab, but I steadied myself. I had survived enough storms in my life to know that silence could be as powerful as any outburst. I stood tall, my back straight, and told myself I would endure the night. But deep down, I knew something was coming. The energy in the room felt charged, as though everyone were waiting for a scene, and they would not have to wait long. My father's hand closed around a microphone, his smile wide and theatrical, and the music stilled. He raised his glass and toasted my sister's vibrant spirit, his words floating across the room with a practiced charm. Applause filled the space, but then his voice shifted, carrying a weight that made my stomach knot. He announced that I would be gifting my penthouse to my sister as her birthday present. For a moment, the air left my lungs. Every eye turned toward me. Some were already clapping, others looked at me with pity or expectation, waiting for me to nod and accept this absurd declaration. My chest tightened, and the glass in my hand felt suddenly heavy. That home was mine, every wall and every window earned through years of dedication. To have it tossed into the air as a party favor left me breathless. My sister gasped on cue, her hand covering her mouth in mock surprise, though I saw the flicker in her eyes, the glimmer of satisfaction she could not quite hide. She had known. This was not a slip of the tongue. This had been planned. The murmurs rose. My mother chimed in, her voice soft yet pointed, urging me to do the right thing, reminding me that sharing with family was the least I could do. My aunt leaned forward, her smile tight as she told me not to be selfish. My uncle muttered about family first. The pressure pressed down like a physical weight, their voices layering into a chorus of expectation. I swallowed hard and placed my glass down on the table. My hands did not shake. My voice came out clear, sharp enough to cut through the noise. I told them no. The word lingered in the air, stopping conversations mid-breath. Applause faltered. My father's smile twisted, and his eyes narrowed with a sharpness that made the room fall silent. The weight of my refusal settled over the gathering like a storm about to break, and I knew in that moment that the night would never be the same again. My father's jaw clenched so tightly that I thought the microphone might snap in his hand. The booming confidence that had filled the room only moments earlier drained from his voice, replaced with a sharp edge that made my stomach tighten. He asked me to repeat myself, as though the word no was not one he was capable of hearing. I met his gaze and repeated it, louder this time, refusing to let my resolve falter. I told him my penthouse was mine, that every square inch of it had been built from sleepless nights and endless work. My sister's struggles, her inability to hold down a job, were not mine to fix. The reaction was immediate. My mother's face hardened, her tone rising as she demanded to know how I could be so heartless. My aunt gasped dramatically, clutching her necklace as though my refusal were some kind of personal crime against her. Uncle George muttered the word ungrateful under his breath. Guests began whispering, their voices circling me like a swarm. A woman I barely knew leaned toward her husband and hissed that I had always been too independent. Another clucked her tongue, pitying my sister for being saddled with someone like me. Each word was a needle, but I refused to bend. I straightened my shoulders and reminded them that I had paid for half of this extravagant party. The chef, the wine, even some of the decorations had come out of my pocket, and still, they dared to demand my home. My voice grew louder as I laid the truth bare. I had supported this family for years while being treated like an outsider. The whispers quieted for a moment, though the judgment in their eyes remained as sharp as ever. The tension in the room thickened, the energy shifting like a storm cloud ready to burst. My father's grip tightened around the microphone, his smile gone, his face twisted into a mask of fury. He stepped closer, his presence filling the space between us. And then, before I could react, his hand swung across my cheek with a crack that silenced every whisper. Pain shot through my face, my head snapping to the side. My pearl earring flew off, skittering across the marble floor, until it landed beneath a table leg. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Someone fumbled with a phone, the red light of a recording blinking like an accusation in the air. My sister covered her mouth with her hand, but her eyes betrayed her. There were no tears, only the faint glimmer of satisfaction that she couldn't hide. My mother's voice trembled as she demanded that I apologize to my father, as though I had been the one to disgrace the family. Her words burned through me, but I stayed silent, my hand brushing the warmth of my stinging cheek. I bent down, my knees steady despite the trembling inside, and picked up the earring. Its cool surface rested against my palm, grounding me. Straightening, I looked directly at my sister, her painted expression faltering for just a second. My voice was low but sharp as glass when I wished her a happy birthday. Then I slipped the earring into my pocket and turned away. The crowd parted as I walked toward the door. I heard their whispers trailing after me, cold, selfish, ungrateful, but they no longer pierced as deeply. The heavy door closed behind me with a solid click, cutting off the chaos inside. In the hallway, silence wrapped around me. My cheek burned, but my heart was steady. I leaned against the cold marble wall and dialed my best friend. Kayla answered on the first ring, her voice tight with worry. I told her what had happened, my words tumbling out flat but shaking underneath. She listened, her anger simmering in the silence, then told me what I already knew. She said I didn't deserve any of this, that I had carried my family for years while they dismissed me. And then she said the one thing that cut through the fog: call Grandma Margaret. The moment she said it, I knew she was right. My grandmother had always seen through the games and favoritism that ruled this family. At 80 years old, she still held the financial strings, her authority unmatched. If anyone could put a stop to this madness, it was her. I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb hovering over her name, my heart pounding but certain. I pressed the button, and when her voice came through the line, steady and expectant, I knew the night was far from over. Half an hour later, the door to the penthouse flew open again. My grandmother stepped inside, her silver cane striking the floor with a rhythm that silenced the room. Conversations died mid-word, the string quartet froze, and all eyes turned to her. She looked every bit the queen she had always been, her eyes sharp and cutting through the air. Her voice carried like steel, as she demanded my father explain why he had dared to lay a hand on his daughter. The color drained from his face, the microphone slipping slightly in his grasp. My mother stammered something, but my grandmother raised her hand, silencing her without effort. She gave them 5 minutes to find the earring, her voice ringing like a command. Panic rippled through the room. My sister dropped to her knees, crawling across the floor in her shimmering gown, while my mother clutched at my father's arm, whispering frantically. My aunt and uncle stood rigid, their smugness evaporated. I watched from the back, my cheeks still throbbing, my heart steady. My grandmother's gaze swept across the room, and then she spoke words that left no room for doubt. She said I was the only one she trusted, the only one who had built a life without excuses, without handouts. One by one, she tore into them: my father for failing to run his family, my mother for coddling my sister into uselessness, my sister for taking and taking until there was nothing left to give. And then she made her decision. Her voice rang out, clear and deliberate. She was rewriting her will. Everything she owned, every estate, every investment, would go to me. The room erupted into chaos. My mother screamed, my sister collapsed into a chair sobbing, my father stood silent and rigid, and the guests buzzed like bees in a broken hive. Yet, in the center of that storm, I stood still, my grandmother's words wrapping around me like armor. For the first time that night, I felt the ground solid beneath my feet. The chaos in that room was unlike anything I had ever witnessed. My mother's voice cracked as she shouted that this was unfair, her words splintering against the walls like broken glass. She insisted my grandmother was overreacting, that I was fine, that I was strong enough to handle life without such favoritism. But my grandmother's eyes narrowed, her voice snapping like a whip, as she reminded them that my strength existed only because I had been forced to survive without their support. The silence that followed was crushing. No one dared to argue with her. My sister sobbed into her fiancé's shoulder, though even he looked uneasy, his gaze darting toward the exit as if calculating how long he should stay before escaping the scandal. My aunt whispered furiously to my uncle, her usual smugness curdling into pale panic. Some guests averted their eyes, ashamed to be caught in the mess, while others pulled out their phones, capturing every word and every tear, eager to spread the drama across the city before the night was over. I remained in the background, my hands clasped together tightly, watching my grandmother take control with the authority of someone who had commanded respect her entire life. Her cane struck the floor with finality as she declared the family had failed me. She said they had used me, shamed me, and even struck me, and that it ended tonight. Guests shifted uneasily in their seats. The glamour of the evening shattered into jagged fragments of truth. My father tried once more to defend himself, his voice trembling as he insisted I was strong, that I could withstand anything. My grandmother's reply was swift and brutal. She said strength meant nothing when it was born from abandonment, that their neglect was not a badge of honor but a wound I had been forced to carry alone. Her words silenced him completely. My mother wept quietly, her mascara smudging, her voice begging my grandmother not to tear the family apart. But Margaret did not falter. She turned from them, her gaze softening only when it met mine. She walked toward me, her cane steady, her shoulders unyielding. I felt every pair of eyes on us, but for once, I did not shrink under the weight of their judgment. My grandmother's presence filled me with a strength I had not realized I was capable of holding. The earring was still tucked in my pocket, the one token of that humiliating moment I would not let them find. My grandmother never asked about it. She knew somehow that I had it. Instead, she reached for my hand, her eyes fierce as she declared her trust in me. Her voice carried through the room, reminding everyone that real worth was not measured in charm or appearances but in resilience, in what one built when no one believed in them. By the time she finished, the party was no longer a celebration. It was a reckoning. The music had stopped, the food sat untouched, and the guests whispered furiously, as though unsure whether to stay or flee. My sister's tears had shifted from performance to desperation. Her engagement, her position as the golden child, everything she clung to so tightly was slipping through her fingers. My father stood stiff, his jaw locked, unable to meet my grandmother's gaze. My mother looked broken, Her carefully constructed image of a perfect family crumbling in front of everyone. I said nothing. I didn't need to. My grandmother had spoken for me, and her words carried the weight I could never match. For years, I had begged for their approval, but that night, for the first time, I realized I did not need it. I had someone in my corner who saw me clearly, who valued the life I had built. That realization steadied me more than any applause or recognition ever could. Later that night, as I sat alone in my own penthouse, the city skyline glittering outside my windows, my phone buzzed nonstop. The video of my father striking me had already gone viral, spreading like wildfire across every platform. Thousands of strangers condemned his actions, their words filling my screen with validation I had never received from my own blood. Some said I deserved better. Others called out the hypocrisy of a family that demanded everything and gave nothing. The outrage grew with every share, every comment, every repost. Part of me wanted to shut it all off, to hide from the storm that now surrounded my name. But another part of me felt vindicated. For so long, I had been invisible within my own family, and now the world was seeing me clearly. The truth could no longer be buried under forced smiles and polite toasts. The world had witnessed it all, and there was no turning back. Then came the message from a mutual friend, short and cutting. My sister's engagement was unraveling. Ethan's family was reconsidering, unwilling to tie themselves to the scandal that now clung to the Carters. They were worried about baggage, about reputation. In other words, they were ready to walk away. I read the message twice, my chest tightening with a strange mix of emotions. There was a flicker of pity for her, but it faded quickly. She had stood by in silence while our father humiliated me, had played her role in the charade that night without hesitation. Her silence had been as loud as his slap. If her future was crumbling, it was not by my hand but by her own choices. The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent, breaking me from my thoughts. When I opened the door, my parents stood there. Their faces were drawn, their shoulders slumped, their usual confidence gone. My father spoke first, his voice low, telling me they needed to talk. My mother's eyes were red, her tone pleading as she apologized, insisting the pressure to support my sister had gotten out of hand. I crossed my arms, my jaw tightening. Their words felt rehearsed, hollow, like lines they had practiced together. I reminded them that they had demanded my home, humiliated me, and struck me in front of everyone. My father flinched, unable to meet my eyes, while my mother pressed on, her voice breaking as she whispered that we were family, that they had made a mistake. I shook my head slowly, my voice cold as I told them their mistake had cost me my trust. They had chosen my sister over me again, and I was finished. My father's face reddened, but he said nothing. My mother reached out a trembling hand, whispering please, but I stepped back, the distance between us final. And then I closed the door, their silhouettes fading behind the frosted glass. My heart pounded, but I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight I had carried for so long had finally lifted. For the first time in my life, I was no longer their pawn. I was free. Kayla arrived not long after I closed the door on my parents. The moment she stepped inside, she wrapped me in a hug that carried more warmth than anything I had felt all night. Her eyes were fierce, her jaw tight, but her voice softened when she told me I had done the right thing. She said I could not allow them to walk back their cruelty with shallow apologies. She poured herself a cup of coffee, sat cross-legged on my couch, and listened as I scrolled through the posts flooding my phone. The internet had turned the party into a scandal, every detail dissected in real time. Clips of my father's slap were replayed with captions condemning his actions. Strangers left comments filled with outrage, some calling him abusive, others pointing out the hypocrisy of demanding his successful daughter hand over her home to the sister who had never contributed. My mother's attempt to demand an apology from me was replayed with scorn, her words labeled as manipulative and cold. Even my sister's carefully staged tears were mocked as performative, people catching the flicker of satisfaction in her eyes before she forced the sobs. Kayla scrolled with me, shaking her head at the cruelty of strangers but nodding firmly when she saw the overwhelming support directed my way. She told me this was not just scandal but truth finally exposed. For years, I had carried the burden of being invisible, and now the world had seen what I had endured. Her hands squeezed mine as she reminded me that strength was not about enduring abuse silently but about drawing the line, and I had done that. Then came the email. My phone pinged, and the subject line froze me in place. From Margaret. My grandmother's words filled the screen, steady and absolute. She told me her decision stood. The will was already being redrafted, naming me as her sole heir. She reminded me that I had proven my worth not only to her but to myself. She told me to stay strong. Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them away, letting the weight of her trust settle into me. Kayla smiled softly, telling me that my grandmother's support was a lifeline, that I was no longer standing alone. I nodded, my chest tight but steady. I realized then that family was not defined by blood but by respect, by those who lifted you instead of tearing you down. The days that followed blurred into weeks, each one marked by headlines, gossip, and fallout. My sister's engagement finally collapsed. Ethan's family severed ties, unwilling to bind themselves to a name tarnished by viral disgrace. My father's business dealings faltered, longtime clients quietly stepping back, not wanting to be associated with someone who had struck his daughter in public. My mother's social circle, once bustling with charity events and parties, dwindled until she was left with little more than whispers and pity. Through it all, I stayed silent. I blocked their numbers, ignored their pleas, and shut the door on any attempt at reconciliation. For the first time in my life, I was living without their shadow pressing down on me. The silence was not empty. It was peaceful. 3 months later, I stood in my penthouse, the same one they had tried to strip from me, watching the skyline glow against the night. The city lights shimmered, reflecting all that I had built. I had been promoted again, this time celebrated as a leader in innovation. At the ceremony, colleagues had cheered as my name was announced, their pride in me genuine, their applause filled with respect. No false comparisons, no conditional approval, just recognition of what I had earned. Kayla had become my anchor. We met weekly, her laughter filling the spaces my family had once occupied. We planned trips, debated trends in technology, and built memories that made my home feel lighter. My colleagues, too, had stepped into the circle of my chosen family. Dinners, brainstorming sessions, and small moments of camaraderie reminded me that I was not alone. One evening, my teammate Sarah raised a glass in my honor, her toast simple yet powerful. She said I proved that hard work paid off. I smiled through the tears that threatened, warmed by the sincerity in their eyes. And then there was Margaret. My grandmother remained my fiercest ally. She finalized the transfer of her estate, placing documents into my hands during lunch at her favorite cafe. Her eyes gleamed with pride, as she told me I was the only one she trusted, the only one who carried her spirit forward. Her faith in me was worth more than any fortune. She called often, her stories rich with lessons, her wisdom grounding me when the weight of my new responsibilities felt heavy. Looking out at the skyline that evening, I understood the lesson carved into me through pain and betrayal. Boundaries were sacred. No one, not even family, had the right to cross them without consequence. I had spent years trying to earn love from people who had no intention of giving it. Now I gave that love to myself, and to those who truly valued me. The penthouse no longer felt like a battleground. It was my sanctuary, filled with reminders of what I had overcome. The award glinting on the shelf was more than recognition of achievement. It was proof that I had survived, that I had thrived in spite of everything. The silence of severed ties was not emptiness but clarity. I picked up my phone, texting Kayla about our next outing. My fingers steady, my heart lighter than it had ever been. As I hit send, I felt peace settle into me. The Carter family's drama was behind me, their shadows no longer dictating my worth. Ahead lay a future that was mine alone, unshackled, bright, and full of promise. I had chosen myself, and for the first time, that was enough. When I think back on that night now, months removed from the chaos, I no longer feel the sharp sting of humiliation. What lingers instead is the clarity it gave me, the kind that only comes when a person is pushed past their breaking point and chooses not to shatter. The memory of my father's hand striking my cheek used to replay in my mind like a cruel echo, but now it has become something else entirely. It is a reminder of the exact moment I stopped begging for acceptance and started living on my own terms. The city outside my windows never sleeps. Some nights, when the skyline glitters against the dark, I stand at the glass and think about how far I have come. I see the penthouse not as a possession but as a symbol, one they tried to strip from me yet could never truly touch. Every corner of this home holds pieces of my journey, the late nights spent coding at the kitchen counter, the celebratory dinners with colleagues, the quiet mornings when I sip coffee and remind myself that peace can be simple. This space is mine not because I fought to keep it, but because I built it in the first place. Work has grown more demanding since my promotion, but it is the kind of demanding that fuels me instead of draining me. I lead teams who look to me not just for answers but for inspiration. Sometimes I catch myself watching them brainstorm, their faces lit with excitement, and I remember the girl who once felt invisible at her own family's table. That girl has been replaced by a woman who knows her worth, and who refuses to let anyone erase it again. My colleagues' respect is genuine, not given out of obligation or blood ties, and that makes it priceless. Kayla has become family in every way that matters. She is the first person I call when I have news, good or bad. Her laughter fills my home, chasing away shadows, and her advice grounds me when self-doubt creeps in. We have created our own rituals, weekly coffee dates, spontaneous weekend trips, late-night conversations that stretch until dawn. She reminds me constantly that chosen family is no less real than the one you are born into, and I have come to believe that with every fiber of my being. Grandmother Margaret is still my fiercest protector, though she insists she is simply doing what is right. She often tells me stories of her youth, tales of choices she made that defied the expectations of her time. I listen intently, soaking in her wisdom, realizing how deeply her spirit runs through me. She tells me I have her fire, her refusal to bow to those who try to diminish her. When she handed me the papers that secured her estate in my name, she did it not with pity or obligation but with pride. It was not just wealth she entrusted to me, but legacy. As for my parents and sister, silence stretches between us like a canyon. I have not spoken to them since that night. At first, the silence felt like loss, a dull ache in my chest that whispered of what could have been. But over time, that ache transformed into something else: freedom. Without their constant judgment, without their endless comparisons, I am lighter. I no longer walk into rooms bracing for criticism, no longer shrink under the weight of being the daughter who never measured up. I measure myself now, and my standards are higher than theirs ever were. I hear bits of news from mutual acquaintances, whispers about my sister's struggles since the engagement ended, about my father's faltering business, about my mother's shrinking social circle. People expect me to feel satisfaction in their downfall, but I don't. What I feel is distance. Their choices created their fate, just as mine created mine. We are no longer tethered, and I have no desire to rewind time or repair what is broken. Instead, I focus on the life unfolding before me. I pour energy into projects that excite me, I celebrate milestones with people who genuinely care, and I allow myself the grace to rest without guilt. The awards on my shelf are not the pinnacle of my identity, but reminders of what is possible when you refuse to give away pieces of yourself to those who do not value them. Some nights, I record my thoughts in a journal, not for anyone else to read, but to remind myself years from now that I survived something that once threatened to crush me. I write about boundaries, about resilience, about the power of saying no, and I write about gratitude for Kayla, for Margaret, for the colleagues who see me, for the woman I have become. I used to believe that family was unshakable, that blood demanded loyalty even when it drained you. But now I know the truth. Family is respect, family is trust, family is love freely given. Anything else is a cage. And I have broken free. Standing at the window tonight, the city alive with possibility, I let that freedom settle into my bones. My story is no longer about survival. It is about thriving. It is about choosing myself, unapologetically, every single day. And I know, without a shadow of doubt, that this is only the beginning.